2014. Now, I am conscious that there are a number of people on this call who haven't worked with Wolfbury previously. So if I may, I'll give a brief intro to the company. We are an award-winning cybersecurity company that are basically in a unique position as we are a purely cybersecurity company, meaning we don't provide IT services. Instead, we concentrate on helping our clients understand the cyber risks that they face through penetration testing, governance, all the way through to SOC and SIEM services. But today we're going to concentrate on our role as a certification body and the Cyber Essentials scheme. Also, quite an important note as well, for the update that we're discussing today, this is going to affect companies who are looking to achieve their Cyber Essentials certification now and have signed up on and after the 24th of January. If you'd signed up before but still haven't completed it, somebody might want to mute their microphone there if they can. If you signed up before, then you're still governed by the old question set. It's only for those signing up now, but this is a good indication of what you're going to have to do to achieve the certification come next year when you look to recertify. So on with the thing, I am just going to pop up a presentation. One of the roles of the purposes of today is going to be really, we're going to try and be as informal as possible and have just a general discussion about the new certification process, and because it is quite a dramatic change. Obviously, we're going to have a few introductions to start. We're going to talk about the Cyber Essentials scheme again, because I know there are a number of companies on this call today that have never looked or never achieved Cyber Essentials before. So I think it would be really, really useful just to give a foundational explanation of that. And then we will sort of launch into the Everdyne update, which may take a little bit of time. I know the session is booked for about an hour, but we don't know how long this conversation will take, and then hopefully we do have time at the end to field some questions. The session is being recorded for those who can't make it, so obviously please let us know if you know you don't want to be included. That's fine. And I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. Just basically to like I said, it's been something that hasn't been updated since 2014. But I will say, I mean, I'm joined today by John Stock, who's our lead when it comes to Cyber Essentials, but I'll leave you introduce yourself. Say hello, John.
So hi, nice to meet everyone. I think I can see some familiar faces and names. So yeah, nice to see you all again. And as Damon said, this is a bit of an update on Cyber Essentials and where we are with it. I'm the governance lead at Wolfbury, so handle all of our Cyber Essentials assessments, and recently become an ISO 27001 lead auditor. Yeah. Just thought I'd drop that in there.
Congratulations.
So yeah, we'll be looking at everything governance related going forward. And as I said, this is a new question set that's come out. It's still very much in its infancy of being rolled out.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, as always with any accreditation, grey areas that may be fleshed out over the next few months, especially from IASME and NCSC. I suppose that's what my role will be with anyone who wants to work with Wolfbury to help achieve Cyber Essentials, will be to help to flesh out all of those grey areas for everyone as well.
Yeah, like most certifications, the question based like this, I mean, they're open to interpretation, right?
Yes.
And how people interpret. So no, that's very cool. So I think let's move on, and we'll start with a brief introduction. Like I said, I do apologize for those guys who have been through this before, but it is an important foundation just to explain what the Cyber Essentials scheme actually is. So it started in 2014. It's a government-backed scheme. Lots of people know about it and lots of people get exposure through supply chain. Right, so
I think what we're seeing a lot at the moment, especially with large tender bids for a lot of customers, is Cyber Essentials is one of those things that becomes if you can prove that you've achieved Cyber Essentials or Plus or ASME or any of the accreditations, you can bypass certain areas of tender documentation, and especially with public sector clients as well at the moment. There is a requirement for their supply chain to adhere to these principles.
Yeah, it's really worth saying as well, because it is a technical standard and there is nothing else like it really. It's based on technical controls. You know, it's almost like a light switch. The things actually physically work. Does your antivirus work, and various things like that. And there is, like I said, globally, there's been a struggle to for other countries. The UK have set the benchmark really for this, such a lightweight standard, but it is such an important standard. And we're seeing other countries now. I was on a conversation with an organisation in Perth, Australia last week, and the state of Western Australia have adopted the Cyber Essentials standard and are rolling out. They've rebadged it to some relevant Australian type of name, but I can't remember what it is now. But we're seeing that in Canada as well, and various other locations are all taking on this standard. So it is a really worthwhile exercise.
I think it's the way that it's evolved with Cyber Essentials. So originally there was so many different accreditation bodies who were involved.
Yeah.
NCSC realized there was a lot of confusion over how it was being marked.
With our interpretation again.
The interpretation, right? Yeah. So ASME have become that central accreditation body, working very closely with NCSC. And as Damon said, the way that now other countries are adopting a similar standard shows that actually what the UK has done in providing this accreditation for small and medium enterprise companies who may not have the financial resource to go for something like an ISO 27001 shows that actually it's been the right approach. And it then becomes more apparent that cybersecurity and the processes that people go through and companies go through doesn't just apply to we'll call them the larger companies in the world.
Completely.
It's appropriate for everyone involved.
Yeah, no, and it's proved its value. So if we take the Cyber Essentials scheme in general, it covers 5 control areas, right? So we can pull them straight up. So the 5 controls are firewalls. So do your firewalls actually do what they're supposed to be doing? Secure configurations, which was back in the day when I was doing testing and things like that, was my personal favorite. You know, default passwords and default usernames on devices was a great one. Then you've got access control.
Yeah, so access control, so how you set up your users, your admin staff. Do you have segregation of accounts so that you're not using your administration accounts for trawling through BBC Sport at lunchtime? You know, they're only used for their appropriate reasoning for it. The malware protection, obviously having malware protection. Well, being the main.
I mean, you know, talking of examples, I mean, there was an example of an organization we supported last year through a ransomware attack who had all the malware protection, but unfortunately the cyber criminals turned it off, right? And bypassed it. So it wasn't set and configured correctly to allow that. So it's an absolute nightmare. So really important that it is tested, right? And then patch management, which all IT providers love, of course.
Yeah, just the updating of everything you can possibly do within appropriate timeframes. And again, Cyber Essentials, it's a reasonable standard because they're not saying that they have to be done within 24 hours, 48 hours. There's a measured approach to everything. And it's about taking that measured approach and making sure that the principles are in place.
We do know the more complex organizations and the larger organizations really do still struggle with the patching of their systems in a timely manner, shall we say.
And which has only probably got a little bit worse since the lovely pandemic that started in 2020, because again, that central control that you would have had in an office environment and maybe being able to, well, if it was a very basic organization, walk around and update somebody's system, that's gone.
Oh, well, we've got more to come today as regards home working and so on as well, haven't we? Right. So it's worth saying as well, there are 2 parts to Cyber Essentials. There's the Cyber Essentials standard, which is the self-assessment, and you've done 1 or 2 of those.
Just a few, yeah.
And then there's the Cyber Essentials Plus scheme, which has always been my favorite in that it just that third-party verification where we actually test them actually physically test to see if the malware protection is working, the patch management is up to date, and the secure configurations are actually secure and the firewalls are protected. I think Cyber Essentials Plus is absolutely vital for that. Standard is really, really important, but primarily I find standard is a good gap analysis for organizations to understand what they need to do to improve. And it's worth saying as well, isn't it, that Cyber Essentials Plus, you have to have a valid Cyber Essentials standard certificate to be able to undertake the plus part. Right? Okay.
As David said, it is, I think the starting process for a lot of companies is always going to be Cyber Essentials Standard, because it gives you that self-realization of either what you're doing is correct, or what you may need improvement areas on. It's about finding those gaps and seeing what kind of roadmap you can put in place. And
yeah, completely well, John. I like to call Cyber Essentials Standard as the first toe on the road to cyber enlightenment, because that's what it is, right? It's just a little toe, right? Maybe a big toe, right? Onto that road. And then, the Cyber Essentials Plus and everything else that brings is really, really important as organizations develop a cyber strategy, right? So that's the original scheme as was, and that all of that is still valid. None of that has changed. The only thing they've basically done now between IASME and the NCSC is introduce further questions and controls around each of those areas. So very quickly, the new question set that you'll be undertaking is called Everdine. Even. I believe it's a mountain in the Malverns.
Yeah, there's some spring water.
Spring water, lovely, yeah. Right? Fantastic. And just to cover off, we're going to go through each one of these in depth, but it covers off cloud services, multi-factor authentication, passwords, thin clients, smartphones, scope changes, clearer definition of home working, backups, and price changes. So these are really, really important changes going on, and some of them are quite interesting. I think we start with the cloud services one first, John. So if you'd like to.
And I think, as I said earlier, it all kind of falls into how that we've been working over the past couple of years. Since COVID hit and everyone was home working, there's been a more reliance on cloud services. There's a greater reliance on that hybrid working model where people aren't actually in offices anymore. Yep. And what's really great is IASME have kind of reacted quite quickly to this. Well, I mean, quickly is relative in 2 years, but it's to get those changes in and be approved from NCSC is a long process they've undergone. And what's really positive is that they've moved quicker than some of the other accreditation bodies to get this all implemented and change what we're looking for, because the world isn't the same as the last couple of years. Really.
That's right, because prior to Everdine, it was cloud services were out of scope, right?
Yeah.
So now they're bringing them all in. So it's worth saying, what do we mean by cloud services? So we're going to throw some acronyms around now. Yeah. So
the acronyms that they've defined, because again, there's so many different ways that you can, and we had a conversation yesterday, didn't we, about what application goes into which cloud definition. So we've got things like infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service.
So infrastructure as a service, AWS and Azure.
Yep. So that would be, and then platform as a service would be AWS.
So EC2. So if you take it, EC2 is infrastructure as a service, and then AWS is the platform as a service, right?
Yeah. And then software as a service would be any of the AWS applications or the Azure applications that sit within that platform.
Yeah, or anything from CRM systems to accountancy packages to absolutely everything, right?
Gmail, Office 365,
Office 365,
Microsoft 365.
Yeah. So all of a sudden now, everything that we've used as businesses over the last couple of years, and we've grown to use, you did right through the COVID pandemic, the digitalization of the services that every business operates has just been complete transformation, really. Just the speed of transformation has been unbelievable. I was reading a paper a couple of days ago, and it was like we did basically 10 years advancement in a year in the first year. And some companies did it better than others, right? So we say, right? So we know it's covering all cloud services. So if you now take a service at all through a provider, then it's now in scope, whereas before it was outside scope. So it covers things like user management, right? So one of my favorite things, well, not favorite things, but I was reading about recently as well, is the fact that Office 365, where larger organizations, 'cause I think with smaller organizations, you pay so much for your Microsoft license subscription, you tend to knock it off quite quickly or swap it around. But larger organizations, people are leaving accounts live,
Okay.
which is something they would never really do, supposedly never really do on network systems. So on servers, they would leave user accounts live. We've known that so many organizations don't have a leavers policy, that when they leave, they cut all access to everything. But that's translating across the cloud. So I know that this is picking a lot of that up.
Yeah. And it is, and again, it's the same, I suppose the way that I look at this, my personal interpretation, it's the same user management controls you would have had on the previous set for Cyber Essentials. It's just applying it to those cloud environments and saying, well, actually, the same principles apply. It's just applying in a different entity, if that's the right way of putting it. Because again, with the whole way that users are managed, how you're setting them up, how you're creating accounts, how you're leaving accounts, do you share accounts across an Azure platform, for example, which I know is a real sticking point at the moment for like MSPs, for example, because of multiple customer bases. Do they have that same shared account across their cloud services for those customers, which is a really interesting one. And the next point, sort of the admin access side of things, this is something that's always been in Cyber Essentials. It's always been there. And it's just applying that, so making sure that your admin accounts are all secured, they're issued in the correct way, they're not shared, there's protection around them, and it's creating everything that was great about Cyber Essentials 2 years ago and just applying it into cloud bases.
And non-repudiation has been a key for one of the key tenets for cybersecurity for so long. You know, you should never share accounts, because how do you identify who is the miscreant, who did things wrong? And then obviously with the user accounts across, it's exactly as you said, they're taking what you're supposed to do on your internal network out to the cloud stuff. So like admin access, right? Defined separate.
Yeah, and I think the way that I suppose the way that it's been looked at before with Beacon, with the previous question set, was that you could put it into the cloud and everything would be out of scope. So actually, then what you're looking at is, well, and it's a conversation I like to think of liability of the cloud provider to make it secure for the customer, accountability where that falls, responsibility. Now the NCSC have basically said, well, it doesn't really matter liability wise who's at fault if there was an issue. If you as a customer have responsibility and are able to action, specific admin access, user management, secure configuration within that cloud platform, it's actually your responsibility. So you can do something about it, which is why this is all coming about now.
Well, and do you know what? It just dovetails really with GDPR, right? Because in the good old days, like the Wild West, right? If you offloaded a service or your data to another company, that company was liable for looking after it. And you were like, well, sorry, mate, you were looking after it. But now with GDPR, that meant as well that if before I hand data to a cloud provider or another party or anything like that, I have to do my due diligence to make sure that that other partner is going to look after the data properly, because ultimately, I'm making the decision to make sure that's it. And they're just doing that now with cloud services, which is great. I just do think it really is going to be incredibly difficult for organizations to manage this. I did see Evan came up with one message. It just did pop up on there, and I'll sort of answer that for you. Basically, and I think this slide will help as well, and I'm going to jump to that in a minute, but if the cloud provider is responsible for patching and managing the infrastructure, they have to be able to demonstrate to you that they're doing it properly, right?
Which,
How's that going to work, John?
well, you're going to ask them very nicely and see if they'll provide that information. I think that's
The ideal solution would be they have Cyber Essentials Plus,
yeah,
right?
or higher standards.
Yeah.
See, now you say that though, right? Because you could say
We've got ISO 27001, but they haven't done Annex A, right? And all they've done is the key part of 27001, which then really doesn't involve any technical controls, and all it is a load of policies in a drawer. See, so I would disagree with that completely.
But then that's how you're ranking.
Yes.
But there comes the grey area of how do you rank accreditations? Do you think that Cyber Essentials would be more of a, because it's more technical based, but it beats the ISO standard?
As soon as you have Annex A involved with
Yes.
ISO 27001, then it's a different story, right? But it just wrangles me that because when people say we've got ISO 27001, so this doesn't matter. But having a piece of paper that says, dib dib dob dob, we are going to have an antivirus, I promise. And then you could put it in a drawer. A piece of paper has never stopped a ransomware attack, is it? Right?
What I love is I've just sent him off on a rant about ISO 27001.
Sorry.
Just one small swoop.
Yeah. Thanks for that. Well, you're the one. Well, I mean, we're undertaking it as we are at the moment, but we're doing Annex A, I should just say. So, right, that's fine. So there's a table on the screen that John's going to explain because it makes no sense to me at all. But one thing is really worth considering now as well, because are you a provider? Do you as a company, so forget about achieving your Cyber Essentials Plus or Cyber Essentials Standard, but if you provide a portal or a gateway or any type of service, mobile app, or any of these type of things that your clients use, you're going to have to make sure that you're able to evidence all this for them, because when they're going through Cyber Essentials certification, they're going to come back to you and ask you for this information as well. So it's quite an interesting exercise this is going to be, I think. Anyway, you explain the table.
Chuck me into the deep end before I go into the deep end of a table. So I think it's something that was raised when they were coming up with the new questions. That is, there may be cloud applications out there that don't actually have the ability for you to be able to set your user access controls in there, or to be able to perform secure configuration. Now at that point, the guidance is actually that the right application to be using to store company data if you can't secure it properly. And I think the problem is, or previously has been, that everyone kind of thinks, well, it's a cloud application, it's secure by design because it's a cloud application, it's all over there. Whereas actually there's so many things that as a customer you can do to protect yourself better.
Well, yeah, completely agree. So I think, right, if you go through that table, because you seem to be pushing back from that thing, right? No, and right, we'll go very, very briefly, and then that point is a great way to segue to the next point, isn't it? Right?
Interesting.
Yes. So no, I mean, all we're trying to say with this table is that whose sort of roles of responsibility from the who's using it. So,
and I think from and again, infrastructure as a service, the way that it's set up. So for example, the provider of that, their hardware firewalls would be their responsibility to manage, to put in the right controls. But when you set up, for example, an Azure server, you can set up your own firewall controls within there for that server on that infrastructure as a service. So that's something that you can do away from also what the provider is doing as well. When it comes to sort of, and I know there's so many grey areas between the infrastructure and the platform as a service, but I think the main ones that I always look at is that what's always going to be relevant is secure configuration. So when you are setting up a cloud platform, so if you're setting up Azure or AWS, you can turn off services, you can turn off software, you can set that to be configured securely from your own controls and admin wise. And then the user access control is something you can always do because you're always setting up your own accounts, or anyone who has the ability, to set up their own passwords or set up a new user within a cloud environment. They can do everything within there to set up that user access control. So I think there is going to be a lot of back and forth, I think, with NCSC, with IASME, about what controls are in place from a customer point of view, what controls are in place from a cloud application review, and I know that these have all been set with the cloud industry forum being involved as well. So I think there's a 6-month window that they're looking at these sort of controls and then reviewing them after that to see actually where is it appropriate,
But
where isn't it.
It is really important to know as well, because even something like Office 365 as a SaaS product, right? In its default state, it's okay, but it's not that secure. There's a lot of hardening that you need to do to that, and people don't do it, right? So we know that because we see that all the time. So moving swiftly along, because I'm conscious of time, right? Multi-factor authentication. Well, so that leads to the point that you were just talking about just now, that you may be using an application, a cloud-based application that is doesn't have very good password constraints, has no multi-factor authentication. So really you have to think as an organization and basically apply some risk to it. Is it worth doing? Is it worth using that product? Now, we've gone through that process ourselves very recently with a product that we were using, we started using. The security controls on it are incredibly limited, so we've had to migrate away from it. It was not on their roadmap. Amazingly, big company have no plans to introduce anything around MFA. So interesting. So,
which will be interesting if their roadmap changes. If more of their customers are going through Cyber Essentials and this process naturally, they're not getting through there because of that. And if they start losing customers because of it, maybe their roadmap will change. But
this is right.
We'll just have to see.
So this is a nice short one though. What are the changes for MFA?
So for MFA, it's basically that for any cloud application you're using, all admin accounts from this year have to have multi-factor authentication enabled against them. And then by 2023, all users will have to have multi-factor authentication as well. They're doing it as a phased approach because they appreciate that to say, right, everyone has to be on MFA now is quite a tricky thing for wider organizations to do, or for larger organizations, sorry. So they're setting it up as a phased approach so that the admin credentials and the admin users now, they can be looked at. Next year, it would be the user accounts that come into effect.
Yeah. No, it is really interesting now, isn't it? And it'll be interesting because not all MFA is equal, really, right? Yeah. Oh, look, there we go. As I said, so yes, Alan Hagen has just said what constitutes MFA, right? So yeah, like personally for me, text messages is a no-go, right? Text message and emails, not MFA, right? It amazes me that banks still use that as their primary thing. Something that produces a token is so much more secure because emails and text messages can be intercepted. I don't know about your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly that. It's applications are the best ones, really, aren't they? You have that additional there on your
token based or applications. That's right. Yeah, completely. And it is just that extra layer. So you have your username, your password, and then another level. So there have been some password changes as well, haven't there? And this is guidance from the NCSC, which is quite interesting.
Guidance from the NCSC. So this is all about how the password complexity length and what you're doing around it as well. So initially, previously on Cyber Essentials, it was an 8 password minimum.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Now that you have to have brute forcing sort of measures in place to stop brute forcing, you can still have an 8 minimum password character length, but you have to have MFA associated with it or use a password deny list. So, and again, the NCSC have got guidance on a password deny list, a password one.
Yeah. So Alan has asked again, he's asked another question, it's quite a right one. So as regards MFA, is there a supplied list by the NCSC of what is appropriate? Is there an approved list of MFA applications and everything?
I don't think I've seen one yet.
No, right. That is a good question.
But I will find out for you, Alan.
Yeah. Yes, Richard. Yeah. Google Workspaces uses 2-step verification. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and Google is pretty secure as long as you enable everything around it. So I thought this was a really interesting point, right? That it's the company's role now to educate right, around passwords more than anything else, because if we flash all of those up, right, it's encouraged people to use longer passwords. You're dead right about deny lists, and they should have been in for so long, because if you say a password has got to be at least 8 characters, have a capital letter, and then have a number or a symbol after it, and that's your security. Well, it's not, is it? Because that's capital P, password with a capital P with a 1 on the end. And we would all agree that's not a secure password in any way, shape, or form. So those deny lists, and there's thousands of those available, where you should stop people using the most common, you know, that list that NCSE produce every year of the top most used passwords, and should be filtered in and stop everything, right? And stop people from using that. Provide usable storage, which is great as well, right? Password managers. I'm a great fan of password managers. There are hundreds of them around.
Yeah, it's something I know. Yeah, they're just brilliant. We were having a conversation earlier about whether we use browser.
Yeah, we're really interesting, aren't we?
Yeah, we're pretty cool people.
Hey, what password manager do you use?
And this is all about whether you use browser enabled ones and whether you do autofill and things like that. Again, I'm on the mindset that autofill is a bad thing on a browser.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that actually you can get that with
biometrics.
Yes.
Right, which is a bit more useful then, right? Yeah, no, completely. And again, I'm not aware that there's a list out, but the NCSE do make reference as well, which surprised me a little bit, as to using Google Chrome's password manager and so on, which I found quite interesting. But you know, that's the guidance around that at the moment. So yeah, interesting. And this bit's been around for ages, not enforcing regular password expiry and not enforcing password complexity, right? So yeah, they're trying to make passwords that people don't write down. Oh, one point on the provide usable secure storage as well. So password managers is a thing, but they do also say that users should have access to a locked filing cabinet that stores passwords, which I found was great.
As long as it's not on a sticky note.
Yeah, as long as it's not a sticky note on your notes. We've all seen them. Yeah, Alan, I have no idea. That as far as we're concerned at the moment, we will ask IASME, and we will come back as regards the question of, are there a list of approved tokens or MFAs or anything? As far as we're concerned at the moment, there aren't any, but we may be very wrong. So changes to thin clients, which is quite interesting, but this doesn't come in until it's not enforced till 2023. Is that right?
Yes. So again, it's similar to multi-factor authentication against users, is that it's not going to be fully enforced until 2023. I think the reason that NCSC and IASME are really keen on this is because of the way that we all work now. We have, you know, cloud applications, virtual desktops, and people are still using their devices or their personal devices as a thin client to get onto a remote desktop or to access VMware or anything like that. But people were leaving their actual end user devices out of the assessment. So, you know, they were just, I think there was one example that was used where all they did was list their cloud environment and didn't say about any end user devices for a huge company. Like, well, you're actually, how are you getting into that cloud environment? You know, it's not as if you enter a room and suddenly you're in the cloud. You have to use a device to access that. So this is why thin clients is becoming a big thing now.
Yeah, it's very interesting though, because if you're using Citrix or RDP and these things out there, they're sandboxed away. So it's what has happened for them to encourage that. And I find that one quite interesting, because I can remember when I started working on IT, I was working on Wise terminals. So I'm used to thin clients for a long time. And I find that quite interesting as to see how it could affect the environment. So it's quite an interesting one. So moving on from thin clients, personal devices, because this just gets more fun as we go, right?
I mean, this kind of goes into that, probably why they introduced the thin client side of it as well, because I think there's a lot of, again, previous applications, organizations that might not have listed any smartphones, tablets, or anything like that in their cyber essentials questions, which we know isn't really the case. You know, everyone, generalization, the majority of companies, the majority of people within those companies will probably be able to access email on their phone. And it is now a case of, if you can access the data, then that should be considered in scope, because you may be using a old laptop at home that is not supported, not running the latest version, doesn't have the right security configurations.
Yeah.
But if you're accessing email on there, there's still an entry point from there.
Yeah, and that's even something like checking emails in a web browser on the mobile device or on the personal device as well, right?
And it basically says that if it's, our general rule, or my general rule at the moment, is if it's accessing company data, it should definitely be included within the scope for it.
And the only exception is with personal devices?
If it's used for voice, text only, or if it's used as a multi-factor authentication.
So it's running
device.
Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator on it, right? That's the only time. Other than that, if they're used for business, then they're right. That's right, and that's going to be that's a huge thing now, because just being able for an organization of any size to be able to collate all the information, and what happens, I suppose, if someone's got a phone and it's say 5-6 years old and you can't update it to a latest version, you just have to tell them then no emails for you. And if that becomes a problem, then you have to supply them with a phone yourself.
Well, I think you can flip that round as well from like a work-life balance. So actually people might look at this and go, well, I don't want my phone to be included in the scope for an accreditation. So I'm going to take my emails and everything off my phone. Which then brings back a little bit about work-life balance, but you only have to use a company-owned device to go and access your emails. You're not sat in John Lewis waiting for, I mean, not personal experience, waiting for your wife to come out of the changing rooms and go back to shopping, and then
waiting for my wife.
Yeah, waiting for your wife to come out of John Lewis and checking my emails. I can actually just turn that away, and you get that separation there of actually it's a work device, so that's for work, and you've got your mobile.
Wow, this is taking a very strange turn, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right. Moving on. Personal devices. So home working. Well, this is. So let's start with the good news, right? So whereas routers used to be in scope for home workers, they no longer are if they're provided by the ISP. So if the company provides them with a router, then it's in scope. But if it's an ISP provided router, then it's out of scope. But everything else is now in scope, right? So
exactly
about that.
So it's, again, it probably falls into that personal devices side of it again. There's an NCSC are very, very, very keen to say that there's no internet service provider home routers that are in scope, because I think there's an issue around PII and collecting IP ranges and that side of things for that. If it's a company-owned router, it's in scope. If you're using the controls to use and to manage that, things like software firewalls, so they're automatically enabled with a lot of devices, but making sure they're switched on, or that lovely corporate VPN that then bypasses all of the firewall controls on that laptop and puts it to the boundary of the organization.
But they're going to be, so the business now, the client is going to be responsible almost for checking. Well, they are going to be responsible for checking that device that's used at home might be shared by everybody else in that house. So it could have great things like Roblox and WhatsApp and all these things on it, right? That could be running on that computer, and it's going to have to be scanned, right?
For plus, yes.
For plus, oh yes, but all right, but it's going to have to be audited as well anyway from the software being used on it, right? So what version of PDF, Adobe or Foxit or wherever it is, because PDF programs always seem to be terrible at that, and everything else. So, oh my word, that is just going to be insane. It's just better for everybody to say no, have a works laptop and work that way.
And like we always say, personal devices, you don't have that control. There's not that visibility over them. If somebody doesn't want to have, I don't know, remote managing software on their own laptop because they don't want to see, or monitoring software because they don't want their personal information to be on a company network. It's really difficult thing to manage. I think the rule of thumb would be, personal devices are an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, that is going to be absolutely insane, because if you think about it as well, you think you're secure, so you get to a place you're secure, then somebody else comes along in your family and installs something in the afternoon that breaks it, right? Oh my word, right? So that for me, I think is possibly the worst one. of them all. Just like, okay, right. So, I mean, this is demonstrated in our scoping document. This is the original from 2014 to the 23rd of January 2022. That was the scope of how everything looked, right, with the internet and the cloud providers as outside of scope, right? Mm-hmm. And you could break down the scope quite easily, couldn't you? You could say the HR network. We see a lot of education establishments just doing the commercial arm or something else because they need it for a tender, right? Mm-hmm. And that we've seen a lot of that over the years, and just this part of the company and so on. That's gone, right?
It's changed slightly. They've redefined how you subset the network. You can still segregate out and have a separate network, but it has to be VLANed off or with a firewall rule in place. You could still have the whole organization under scope and a compliant, but only if there's no internet access to that segregated network. And the reason you probably have a segregated network is you're still running legacy systems and legacy software on there.
Yeah.
That's essential, like EPOS terminals and tills are notorious for running out of date Windows OS.
Oh, completely.
So you could still segment that out, but there'd have to be sufficient controls in place to manage that. But I think with this scoping and the way that it all looks now, as you can see, any cloud services are in scope. So anything, whether it's personal device, server, anything that's connecting to that cloud service is going to fall into scope. And that's where this is the biggest change has come from, is that cloud working.
Yeah, because one of the questions we had from Alan when we were talking about the use of personal devices and home devices was, does that include RDP connections? And it does. Just whatever you are using.
Yeah.
If you're connecting to a cloud provider or your internal services, it's in scope now, which is huge, right? Absolutely. So Edmund asked a question. So would IT support companies that connect to devices in the organizations using TeamViewer, for example, find that their devices are in scope of the organization's cyber essentials?
From my understandings, I've had a conversation with IASME about this over the last couple of days, but that would be, so the RMM software TeamViewer would be under the MSP.
Yeah.
The applicant's controls would be separate to that.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be integrated.
But I'd say, picking up on that though, it's great for any organization on the planet, right? If you've got externally outsourced IT, then it would be great to make sure that external IT, as a minimum, should have Cyber Essentials Plus, right? And they are organized. So I mean, they should be secure. They should be doing everything properly, and I'm assuming that's where that comes from.
Yes. And it was all about how, because if you're an MSP to 100 customers and you've got 10 engineers and they've all got account segregation, they've got multiple admin user accounts for each customer. So there's a really big thing at the moment, and I think it's probably going to be reviewed, I would say, quite quickly, and have more clarification around MSPs and how they access.
You would never think that an IT provider would have the same username and password that they use across multiple accounts, would you?
Shouldn't.
Never seen that before. Okay. Right. So moving on to that, and this is my personal, has been for me a personal bugbear with Cyber Essentials and everything else since its inception. And I remember when I was reading through the original specification, and I thought there's got to be a page missing, right? Because they've never talked about backups before. And now on this one, they've introduced backups, nothing mandatory, but they're given advice and guidance around backups, which is a start, right? I'd like to think that they mandate it in a year's time, because for a lot of the most prevalent attacks today, right, namely ransomware, sometimes the only true way to recover is to restore. And we see so many organizations who really struggle with this, with a ransomware attack, because they have no way of restoring their data, because the backups they thought they had don't work. Right. So
and it is that, isn't it? You can have all of the, I mean, in theory, you can have all of the Cyber Essentials controls in place.
Yeah.
You can still experience an attack.
Yeah.
And unless you have that, you can still be disabled. And with that backup, at least there's something to go to.
Oh,
There's
completely.
something to restore from. Whereas if you don't, what do you do?
I've
You're
always
stuffed,
been,
aren't you?
yeah, completely. I mean, and we see it on a regular basis with organisations. We were dealing with one a couple of weeks ago. I had exactly the same thing. I had to end up paying £35,000. I referenced the IT provider that got hit. It might have been last year, might have been the year before. Everything goes so quickly, and you know their backups, although they were backing up, it was not an offline backup. So the cyber criminals were able to turn off their Intercept X, go into the Sophos product, go into the servers, and then just delete all the backups manually because they were connected. Even though they had 360 odd days of backups for each of their clients, all of their clients lost all of their data because it was online. And you know, simple questions around that, and then evidencing that over with Cyber Essentials Plus. And I think for me, that's where the real value comes with Cyber Essentials Plus is that testing and that verification, because I've never seen a piece of paper stop a ransomware attack. Right, so it's so important that people do the plus element as well.
I mean, on the point of backups, it's always been included within the IASME. So I know we haven't mentioned that before. So you've got Cyber Essentials, which would be the baseline accreditation, Cyber Essentials Plus, which audits against that Cyber Essentials questionnaire, self-assessment. Then you have IASME as a self-assessment.
That's a great question.
And then you also have IASME audited, which audits against IASME self-assessment. So you've got two different levels for Cyber Essentials, really, in IASME.
I mean, I encourage so many organisations to go through the IASME the self-assessment and the IASME audited, right? Because it's a baby ISO 27001 and does fill in a lot of gaps, as we mentioned right at the beginning. Cyber Essentials is technical controls. It's a technical standard, and then I think combining that with the IASME standard, then introducing the understanding of risk, asset risk, and you know, backups. All of that. Yeah, disaster recovery, business continuity, you know, understanding where your data is and how then wrapping the appropriate controls around it, which again goes back to GDPR. That's all GDPR is understanding what data you have and then wrap appropriate controls around it. Because at the end of the day, everybody just wants to know that you're thinking about what you've got and making reasonable.
It's what we always say, isn't it? If you don't know what you've got, then how do you know how to protect it? How do you know what you currently have to protect it is working?
Yeah.
So, and you can't then create a strategy off the back of it. So this is why we always say a full assessment of everything and going, right, where actually are we? It's similar to how you would do, I'm going to go off on a weird analogy, home insurance.
Yeah.
Until you know what you've got in your house, you can't fill out a home insurance form.
No.
Because the value of that home insurance is irrelevant, and then you might miss off a bit of jewelry, which then you can't claim for if you were to be burgled. So having that full visibility of what you've got.
Well, that's a great point. Yeah. You mentioned around the insurance thing, because I know that a lot of the Cyber Essentials changes now is bringing it in line with requirements to obtain cyber insurance for organizations, because we've seen that really sort of ratchet up the pressure that insurance companies are putting on organizations now, that they're expecting them initially, you know, and I've witnessed it with my own eyes, where organizations are using cyber insurance as a like a defense. You know, we don't have to do anything else because if everything goes wrong, we are hacked, you know, we've got insurance.
Well, there's a blame, there's a claim.
Exactly. Well, you know, which is okay, I suppose, but you can't insure against reputational damage and various other things like that. So it's a mistake. But what we're seeing is insurance companies now identifying that, and they're saying, well, no, if you're not doing the basics, you know, then your insurance is going to go up. And we were given by a colleague a great example a couple of weeks ago. Somebody's cyber insurance last year, their premium was like £200 a year, something like that, and it went up to £3,000 a year this year, which is an astronomical increase, because I think they're seeing a lot of that. So that's really useful, and that takes us on another lovely segue, I think, to the changes on the costing model. So to reflect these changes, IASME have slightly modified the way that the pricing structure, as you can see, there it is. So that they break that down. There is no difference between the question sets or anything else like that. That's just the model that they now charge at, and that'll be reflected through with Wolfberry. I believe that information is on their website as well, and everything else around the costing. And that's obviously just for Cyber Essentials standard, plus then it comes on a premium above that. But as I've mentioned before, I'm incredibly keen on the plus element because it is that third-party verification. Quite often as well, if you're an organization that has outsourced IT, then you normally rely on them to complete the application for you. And God bless them, right? They don't always write down what they actually do because we've seen it so many times, right? So it is a good way of verifying that your IT providers are doing everything that they said they should be, that they should be doing, and they say that they are doing. So we don't expect the cybersecurity to be like NASA, but you know, they expect to be doing the basics, which is what this covers. So I know we're done well. We've got 7 minutes left and really super well. I've just got some questions here, right?
This is all the tactic to limit the amount of questions we had to answer.
Yeah,
right?
it
we
was.
Just kept
Yeah,
talking.
well,
And
I completely. I mean, effortless. They would never have noticed.
No.
Thanks. Well, so we got Steve who said, I have no issue with the new direction of travel for Cyber Essentials, but by bringing so much in scope, we are likely to find more and more saying, no, not doing that. Until we perhaps get insurance organizations involved, I should have read this before, or contract demands it. Just like, well, there you go, Steve. Without reading your question, I've answered that question as well. So insurance companies are already involved, and you are right. It is becoming quite onerous, but
I would say it is onerous, but actually it's reflective of where we are at the moment.
I completely agree. Yeah.
And I think what will basically happen, it'll be that so the line is being pulled from the government, isn't it? This is where it's all coming from. From that, you'll have a waterfall effect down. So the government are creating these standards. The government tenders that come through will be adopting these standards and making sure that people abide by them. The smaller suppliers will have to fit that criteria to get into this supply chain and to produce products and to produce services for particular customers. Not just government, obviously other industries will adopt this as well within this. And then we'll all be pulled along in the same direction, which is actually a really good thing, because then, as we said at the start, other countries are adopting the Cyber Essentials methodology and sort of process and creating their own and rebadging it, as Alan Partridge quote would say. And that just shows that actually the UK is doing what it needs to do to progress down this route.
And I think it only came in on the 24th of January now. So what we'll see, I think, is because, you know, I think they've done a fantastic job in putting this together and sort of accommodating the changes in the way that we all work, but they can't account for every instance, and there will be organizations that don't fit very nicely. But that's where IASME are really good, that we can go to them, we can discuss this with them, and they understand and give us workarounds and everything else around it. So I think we got another question here very quickly from Lee. The really short answer to this, Lee, right? Does this potentially put users in scope within those organizations where they're able to log on to a device across organizations? So, e.g., in the university, logging on to a computer in the library. Basically, yes, right? If somebody logs on to a computer, and Evan asked earlier around students. So does that bring students in? I would probably say no.
It's a very, very interesting one, but I know they're looking at the moment, because from an educational point of view, there may be, I mean, it's really difficult with students because they're from different socio-demographics, aren't they? You may have a student who can't actually, and you know, financially have their own mobile. Maybe parents who are like, you're not having a mobile because I know what you'll do on it. So to enforce multi-factor authentication across all student users is going to be really difficult. You may be able to have token based USBs and flash drives and stuff like that for their flash drives. But you may have a central device that is only used for multi-factor authentication that the students could use for it as well. So there's different ways of getting around it, but it'll create that additional control that's there. Because I mean, we've seen with some of the recent phishing simulations that we've done across an education sector, students are, I mean, they're targeted.
Yeah.
They're not as aware of these scam emails coming through. And again, if the network isn't segregated enough, then there can be escalation points and privilege escalations through to staff, IT staff, and progress from there. So I think it is something that they're looking at. So I appreciate, but it is a little bit difficult with MFA.
From a GDPR point of view as well, with students, there are so many things that education establishments cannot do, right? Just for student welfare and so on.
I suppose even with some staff, because you probably I'm never worked in education, but I'm guessing some staff are told they can't use personal devices within a classroom. So then, do they get it? Is it a resource available for schools? There are a lot of grey areas there. Which is, again, as Damon said, so great that we can speak to IASME on a daily basis and get that nailed down, so we're aware of exactly what we need to do to help customers to get through this process and to put the right controls in place.
Yep, completely. No, I think we're out of time, Mr. Stark. So say goodbye to the lovely people.
Bye, lovely people.
Thank you so much for joining today. Any questions, please email us. I'm sure the guys will send out a link to the recording and everything else. And this information for subscription clients, we are building, and it will be available soon, an education portal, and this and the like will all be on that as well for you to review later on. So thank you so much, everybody. Have a lovely day. Take care, and we'll speak to you all soon. Bye bye.